Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Protect Your Cloud Data, an investment firm deters threats with SaaS endpoint protection. When you join today's webinar, you select to join either by phone call or your computer audio. If for any reason you'd like to change that selection, you can do so by the same pane that you used to choose your selection. You'll also have the opportunity to submit questions through that same panel for your presenters today. And you can type in your questions into the questions pane. We'll collect those and address them during the Q&A at the end of the session after the presentation today. So a recording of the webinar will also be available shortly after the conclusion of this presentation. So keep an eye out for that on your emails. My name is Samir. I am a solutions architect at AWS, and I will be your speaker and your moderator for today's webinar. So with that said, let's get started on why security has been traditionally so hard. Now, there are two elements to why traditionally security has been hard. The first one being the lack of visibility. In an on-premises environment, it can be difficult to know what resources and data are out there at any given time, where it's moving, and who is utilizing it or even accessing it. For example, it requires tooling, which can be complex. It can be hard to get accurate, and there's also a lack of real-time asset inventory. Most organizations don't have the level of visibility that they would like in an on-premises environment. And without visibility, it is challenging for organizations to adequately secure their infrastructure and their data to meet their security and compliance requirements. The second aspect to this is low degree of automation. Another typical challenge here is that trying to get rid of the manual processes that are employed to remediate issues has been a challenge. So think of how you might be copying and pasting information from one tool to another or manually applying patches. It's been difficult to automate some of these tasks. And this can be anything from interoperability of third-party tools to some of the homegrown tools that customers and organizations use today. Manual processes also tend to lead to inconsistent execution. It also means longer wait times to address these issues, and in most cases, it disrupts your customer's experience. So with the goal of automation, it is to programmatically handle tasks that would otherwise be done manually, and this is much easier in the cloud, as we'll see. So this combination of lack of visibility into your own environment, coupled with a low degree of automation, compromises an organization's ability to move quickly and effectively secure their on-premises infrastructure. So how then can you elevate your security posture with AWS? Security at AWS is our top priority. That is why we listen closely to our customers to offer both a secure cloud computing environment and innovative security services that satisfy the security and compliance needs of the most risk-sensitive organizations. Today, AWS protects millions of active customers around the world, and our customers represent diverse industries with a wide range of use cases, including large enterprises, startups, educational institutions, and government organizations. The scale and global reach of these customers gives us broad visibility and deep perspective on cloud security, knowledge which we rapidly reinvest back into our leading edge infrastructure and services. Security at AWS starts with our core infrastructure, custom built for the cloud and designed to meet the most stringent security requirements in the world. Our infrastructure is monitored 24/7, so this is to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our customers' data. The same world-class security experts who monitor this infrastructure also build and maintain our broad selection of security services, which can then help you simplify meeting your own security and regulatory requirements. As an AWS customer, regardless of your size or investment, you inherit all of the best practices, the benefits of our experience, and whatever we've tested against the strict test of third-party assurance frameworks. In addition, automating security and compliance tasks to reduce risks allows you to free up resources and focus on your customer and businesses' needs. Um, and AWS finally has a large network of security partners and solutions that extend the benefits of AWS by using security technology and consulting services from familiar solution providers such as CrowdStrike that you already know and trust. So one of the questions that we get often asked is, what is a customer's responsibility for security on the cloud? Now, the way we delineated this is by creating what we call the shared responsibility model. And the delineation is that AWS looks after the security of the cloud and customers look after security in the cloud. What does this really mean? AWS is responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all of our services offered in the cloud. This infrastructure is comprised of hardware, software, networking facilities, and also the physical security of our data centers. So the customer responsibility then is security in the cloud. And this means that it's generally determined by the set of services that you choose to run. There can be anything from configuration work that the customer must perform as part of their security responsibilities. But maybe giving you a better example would help understand what this means. So if you take the concept of Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, or EC2, you generally run an EC2 instance that you need to secure with things like patching of the operating system, management of things like applications and softwares that you run on it, the management of the security groups that act as a virtual firewall that allows traffic into and out of that instance, and also vulnerability management and patch management. The same thing applies to things like S3, where you want to make sure that you're securing the bucket by making sure that they don't have public access. So with that said, AWS provides a set of security solutions that help customers become more secure in the cloud. We align these services with the 5 epics of our cloud adoption framework, but let's discuss a few of these things, starting with identity and access management. Identity and access management forms the backbone of your AWS deployment. Some of the things you want to consider when building out your IAM framework are things like separation of duties, least privilege access, just-in-time privilege management, as well as reducing reliance on long-term credentials. Operating on some of these principles limits your blast radius or potential impact of inappropriate use of valid credentials. The principle of least privilege also allows you to enforce separation of duties for oversight and governance, and makes auditing and the entitlements of your resources much easier. Second aspect of this is detective controls, which can be used to gain visibility into the security posture of your organization, as well as for threat identification and response efforts. There are different types of detective controls, for example, conducting an inventory of assets and their detailed attributes, and things like CloudTrail services that are all API calls made to your AWS environment, and VPC flow logs that provide visibility into traffic flows to and from your VPC can be leveraged to provide greater visibility close to real time for occurrences in the AWS environment. Moving on to infrastructure protection, which encompasses control methodologies such as defense in depth, which is necessary to meet certain compliance requirements. For example, you'll define network boundaries by defining things like public and private subnets within a VPC, doing things like security configuration and maintenance, making sure that authentication and authorization for things like keys and access levels are in place, and of course, appropriate policy enforcement points by using things like web application firewalls. Second thing, the other thing that we want to talk about was data protection, which involves securing data at rest and in transit. Data at rest represents any data that you persist for any duration. This includes block storage, object storage, databases, archives, and really any other storage medium on which data is persisted. Protecting your data at rest reduces the risk of unauthorized access when encryption and appropriate access controls are implemented. Data in transit is any data that gets transmitted from one system to another. This includes communication between resources within your own environment, as well as communication between other services and your end users. By providing appropriate level of protection for your data in transit, you protect the confidentiality and integrity of your application's data. When protecting your data in transit, make sure you do things like securing it with protocols such as TLS. If you're talking back to an on-premise environment, use things like VPNs and Direct Connect, which can certainly add an extra layer of protection for that data in transit. Talking a little bit about incident response, even with extremely mature preventive and detective controls, your organization should still put processes in place to respond and mitigate the potential impact of security incidents. The architecture of your workload strongly affects the ability of your teams to operate effectively during an incident, and to isolate or contain systems, and finally to restore them to their last known good state. Putting them in place, the tools in place, and the access ahead of a security incident, and then routinely practicing this with things like game days will help you ensure that your architecture can accommodate timely investigation and recovery. So with that said, I wanted to make sure that I transition over to Con and Saj. Thanks, Con and Saj. We're now going to transition to Con, who will talk about CrowdStrike security.
Great. Thank you, Samir, for that introduction. So thank you, Samir. I think that was a great introduction and context. Just very quickly, I wanted to kind of give a quick summary on CrowdStrike. I'll make the assumption that not everybody is familiar with who we are and what we do. I think the interesting thing about CrowdStrike for this webinar is that we come to the problem of cloud security by using the cloud to actually protect the cloud. And let me explain a little bit about that. Certainly, when CrowdStrike was looking at the problem of endpoint protection, and I think that generally, there's been a lot of attention has gravitated in the security space back down onto the endpoints, because ultimately that is where the data lives, that is where the credentials live, that is ultimately where points of failure are in terms of humans interacting with the data that can be exploited by adversaries. And the cloud has been tremendously powerful for us here at CrowdStrike in trying to crack that thorny problem of securing data on endpoints. For example, the endpoint has changed, and the cloud has allowed us to try and keep up to speed in terms of that evolution of the endpoint. We've seen endpoints move beyond the corporate firewalls and move beyond the traditional perimeter. And again, with a cloud approach, it allows us to basically get our arms around where those endpoints are. The endpoints themselves have changed. I mean, it's not simply just now a question of a discussion about laptops, desktops, or servers. We now have endpoints that have become instances or workloads. Those are changes in terms of the operation of those endpoints, and that's lifted up new requirements that have to be solved from a security point of view, and the cloud has allowed us at CrowdStrike to do that. Again, the endpoint used to be looked at in terms of a physical device. Now, obviously, we have the arrival of virtualized environments, and it is said about workloads that are basically resident in cloud infrastructure. And again, we've used the cloud approach to basically secure that and lock down and secure those new endpoints. How we've done that is we've built a platform, and the platform that we have here at CrowdStrike is the Falcon platform. Now, you're going to be very pleased. I am not going to talk to this slide. It's very, very complicated, but I really just put it up there just to give you an appreciation as to the size and the scope of what we can do from the cloud to protect data that may be within an environment and an organization. And very broadly, there are kind of like three major use cases that we kind of use our infrastructure and our platform for. One is obviously to go after the endpoint security use case in terms of classic sort of detection, prevention, and response capabilities. Furthermore, we then have capabilities where we can help with security and IT operations. This is really kind of looking into the areas of visibility of assets that you may have in the environment, and then starting to look at, the area of vulnerability management and assessment. And again, we have capabilities there and use cases we cover off there. Then thirdly, is that of threat intelligence. In some ways, the best way to protect the environment is to anticipate what potentially you may be facing, what may be coming down the turnpike at you in terms of threats, vulnerabilities, and also the threat actors that may be targeting you. The ability to have that context as you build out your proactive security strategy and your tactical one. Again, we have the capabilities to offer you there. And the other reality is that, again, with the platform we've built, is that, yes, it allows us to address a lot of the use cases, but there are use cases that we at CrowdStrike don't necessarily directly address. We have the ability to leverage our platform and the infrastructure we've built to third parties who can address additional use cases and capabilities that we at CrowdStrike don't have, but may be relevant to our customers at a point in time. And therefore, again, the benefit there is that having made the investment in that cloud environment, then they don't have to continually kind of go and deploy out new agents, new on-prem or cloud infrastructure to basically address those use cases. So we have the ability now through an app store where, again, we can let partners participate in our cloud security play. And just about the architecture itself, it's very simple. We have one cloud and we have one agent. And that agent, as I said, is basically doing some of the basic functionality you'd expect from an endpoint protection platform, about carrying out prevention, detecting threats, the ability to hunt for threats that may just be starting to appear into the environment. As I talked about threat intelligence, the ability to anticipate threats that may well be coming your way. And also importantly, if you do have incidents, is the ability to triage and remediate and respond to them. And again, we have capabilities there. And again, the cloud is very instructive here because, again, these capabilities are all being leveraged off of, I said, one cloud and one agent. And we have customers who may only want our prevention capability, but over time they may be interested to look at our detection capabilities, our hunting capabilities. With the cloud, really what we can do here is literally flicking a switch to turn on that additional functionality for them and address those use cases. Really, as I said, just using that one agent. So again, it's a very elegant model in terms of how we can basically address our customer needs. Now, Saj covered this already about the shared responsibility model. And again, just to dial in here, really where CrowdStrike is helping out and using that model is that we are really focused on security in the cloud and really helping you as customers and organizations that are migrating into the cloud. As you said, you have that responsibility to secure in the cloud. And really our play here is to provide you with capabilities and tooling that will allow you to basically step up to that challenge. And again, our capabilities here are being used by commercial and government customers. Again, customers who have got cloud assets. And as I said, really, again, our architecture lets us span across the kind of the ever-evolving nature of the endpoint as it kind of changes and morphs across virtual machines, container, serverless architectures, etc. So what we really want you to do for the remainder of the webinar is get a lot more practical here and start to kind of talk about real usage and real use cases here. And there's kind of three areas in terms of, I showed you that very large and maybe potentially complicated platform slide. Is really just to kind of focus it into kind of three areas that we thought would be relevant for today's discussion. One is obviously about endpoint protection, and we'll go into that. The other area is about, a product we have here at CrowdStrike called Falcon Discover for AWS, which really is about helping with visibility into the assets and instances that you have within the cloud and trying to basically identify where they are and what are they doing and also importantly, maybe identify those assets that are not protected. And again, we'll talk about that. And then the other thing is then to talk about Falcon Complete, which is really a service where we deliver endpoint protection as a service from the cloud, and we're going to dive into and talk about that. So really the best way to address this is really to talk about real-world use cases derived from real experience. And to do that, the best way to do that is to talk to a real customer. So I'm delighted that at this point in the webinar, I'm going to be joined by Saj Haider, who's the Chief Information Security Officer for Oak Hill Advisors. And Saj, welcome to the webinar. Maybe it would be useful at this point for you maybe just to introduce who you are, what you do, and give us a little bit of a background on Oak Hill Advisors.
Sure. Thank you, Con, and thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. So my name is Sajwal Haider. I have a dual role at Oak Hill Advisors. I'm the head of infrastructure, and I'm also the CISO here, so responsible for cybersecurity. So a little bit about Oak Hill Advisors. We are a credit fund managing roughly $32 billion globally for institutional investors. And we operate in pretty much everywhere in the world, but we have about 5 offices, and I've been here close to 6 years at this point.
Great. So maybe just drilling in a little bit, Saj, can you maybe just outline to us a little bit about the environment that you have there at Oak Hill and about your migration into the cloud?
Sure. So I would say about 5 years ago, as the business was going through a significant uptick in terms of assets under management and the internal user base, we started looking at our technology requirements and also started looking at what type of security and privacy requirements will come from a regulatory perspective or from an investor perspective, and also internal business requirements in terms of technology. So at that time, we decided that it probably would not be a good idea to keep on running the infrastructure and applications the way we had been traditionally doing on on-premise data centers. And we started evaluating how we can adopt cloud. So like I said, about 5 years ago, that's where we started adopting cloud. We, if you will, went into a cloud-first type of strategy mode, starting with Office 365 to Salesforce and a few other things. And at this point, we have upwards of 50 cloud services, primarily SaaS, that are being used at Oak Hill Advisors. And then about year and a half ago, we decided to wind down our on-premise data centers and move to AWS. So essentially, over the course of past year or so, we moved most of our infrastructure elements, our virtual machines and things like that, and network infrastructure to AWS. So at this point, we are primarily operating out of AWS and using other cloud services, primarily SaaS services.
So maybe in terms of that migration, Saj, would you assess that you're completely migrated, or are you halfway there? Maybe give us a sense for where you are. I mean, you were saying it's taken you 5 years to get to this point. It might be interesting just to understand how far you've got to go.
So I think migrating to cloud is an ongoing process. I'm not sure when I'll be able to say we're completely migrated. But what we have done is we, in essence, lifted and shifted our infrastructure, and now we have started the process of re-platforming our applications. So, looking at containers, serverless, building applications around it at this point on AWS. And we're also focused on integrating what we run in AWS across other cloud services as well. So it's a continuous process. I don't think I'll ever be able to say we're completely done.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, because obviously when I ask that question of other customers, they'll give me an assessment, we're 50 or 60% there. But I think you're absolutely right, Saj, that even if, I think you're probably right at the forefront of this, but the cloud itself, even once you get there, it's like it's a promised land. You're never really quite there because it's continued to morph and evolve itself. So even some of the things you did obviously you're having to reinvent, as you say, and move on in terms of, you say, maybe into serverless type of environments. I think that's very useful for folk. So obviously, you've got 5 years of experience under your belt. There's a lot of things you've obviously learned there. I think it would be maybe interesting for us maybe to go through some use cases and challenges that you've encountered along the way. I think one that I think comes to mind is the very definition of what your perimeter is and has been has changed. Can you maybe just talk about that, about what you've seen in terms of the challenge with your perimeter?
Right. So when we look at perimeter less environments, because this is something everyone is grappling with and talking about, we essentially look at where our applications reside and how do we access those applications, meaning which endpoints and users access those applications. So, moving to the cloud, especially SaaS, essentially the applications are not sitting behind a firewall anymore. They are sitting in various public cloud providers, data centers, and then moving the infrastructure to the cloud itself means now the servers are sitting in the infrastructure, and especially when we start leveraging, which we are leveraging services on AWS, they are not even servers, right? So these are services. So from an application perspective, there is no perimeter. I've seen some organizations continue to work with some semblance of perimeter where they would proxy all kinds of traffic through certain devices. I personally don't like that particular design pattern because I think that takes away the value of the cloud, where you may have tied all the availability and resiliency of the cloud to your devices or in your data center somewhere. So I would say there is no perimeter from an application perspective. On the other hand, we have users that are operating globally, and they are operating out of mobile devices and remote locations. So they are not sitting behind firewalls either. So why does all this matter? It matters because traditionally you would have firewalls or these central control points where you would insert, security services, because most of them used to be network-based services, whether it's mirroring or for data loss prevention control points or some proxying capabilities or sandboxing. That type of perimeter really doesn't exist anymore. So that's how I look at it.
And again, as you say, you've really kind of moved, that whole idea of traditional sort of firewalls and proxying, your applications. You've kind of really embraced the full cloud approach here. Are there any elements of your infrastructure where you're still using some of those old approaches, or are you completely kind of crossed the chasm?
Well, no, we are certainly using in certain areas, like for servers, for example, and even we still have offices where people are sitting and they are sitting behind firewalls. However, what I would say is from a focus perspective on where we need to apply our security services, we are focused around on one end, it's the endpoint, which is what we're talking about today, because that's where most of the access to these cloud services is happening from. So most of the emphasis is around the endpoint. And then, from a services perspective, the applications, for example, we are focused around getting the visibility, getting API controls, which APIs are being used, what's allowed, what's not allowed. So it's mostly around discovery and applying security there, but it's different type of security capabilities that we're applying than just firewalls. So from a user perspective, most of the focus is around endpoints at this point, whether it's server endpoint or desktop endpoint.
Right. So in terms of just that challenge, can you maybe just outline to folk how the Falcon platform has helped you, with that redefined perimeter? Right.
So so first and foremost, one thing is because we have users in multiple locations, and we have applications that are running in different areas. We were looking for some solution, and we have servers running in AWS as well. some on-prem, especially. So we started using CrowdStrike 3 years ago. I should have mentioned that earlier. So this was prior to move to AWS, but we were planning move to AWS at that point. So point is, we had on-premise servers. We were planning on moving to AWS. We had users that were using physical and virtual desktops and physical laptop endpoints. So we were looking for a single pane of glass essentially for these users. So, and we didn't want to run back-end services in our data centers. So that was, one reason why we looked at CrowdStrike and CrowdStrike running from the cloud. The other thing, or the other dimension there, was that we traditionally or generally look for platform-based solutions. So we don't like single solution vendors, and the reason for that is, we're leveraging various type of technologies, and we do know that we need to secure them, and we need to secure them from a different various dimensions. And it's hard to manage. We don't want to get, for example, encryption system for one type of deployment and AV for on-premise separately, and then USB control from another vendor. We're looking for platforms. So that's part of the reason why we liked CrowdStrike approach, where we were able to get endpoint visibility, forensics capability, malware protection in a single solution.
So you like my platform slide, Saj?
Yes, and that's right.
Cool. Maybe kind of moving on from there, maybe going back to one of the comments that Samir made right up at the start of the webinar was, one of the difficulties with security is about visibility, and there's challenges therein. Obviously when you move to the cloud is, in theory that could become even more difficult for you, trying to figure out where are all these assets, because as I said, in that transition, you're probably still going to be on-prem, you're going to be, in the cloud, you might be using firewalls, you might not, it's trying to basically, find where everything is. Can you maybe just explain to us, some of the challenges you've seen with visibility and how potentially the cloud is helping you?
Sure. So I would say the biggest challenge in terms of visibility is that it's between teams. So we have security teams and we have infrastructure teams. And infrastructure teams have their own context, and AWS provides a lot of visibility into what's going on, visibility and control. But the infrastructure team is looking at that from their context. However, the security team in many cases lacks that context. When instances get spun up, their security groups, the VPC, the type of network, the storage attached, all of that, the infrastructure team knows already and knows how to dig deeper from a AWS perspective, from that console. However, the security team may not get that context. So that was the biggest challenge in terms of visibility. So that's where we feel CrowdStrike really helps us in terms of AWS visibility. The other challenge with the visibility is that from the infrastructure team perspective, they do not know, because they don't do this on a day-to-day perspective, what the users are doing and how are they accessing the applications. So essentially how things are correlated together. From an infrastructure perspective, user logging in, what it does, what the user does with the applications. So getting that visibility end to end was also extremely challenging.
Right. So maybe just commenting about, how have we helped you out with that kind of visibility challenge in your environment? Can you maybe just talk us through, some of the benefits you've seen and some of the capabilities we provided to you?
Right. So from a security perspective, because I have this dual role, sometimes it's difficult to delineate between whether I'm talking from an infrastructure perspective or a security perspective. But from a security perspective, this is about, the CrowdStrike platform has helped the team identify which resources are running within our AWS environment. So the instance is which security groups they are running in, which VPCs they are in, how much storage they're using, who's logging into it, and what they are doing it. And they obviously, the CrowdStrike platform has processes and what those processes are doing on the machine, what's being blocked, what's not being blocked, those kind of things. So the point is now they have this full end-to-end view of the server, let's say, what's attached to it, and what the users are doing on it in one console, as opposed to moving across multiple consoles. And, in my view, and this doesn't get discussed a lot, AWS has great visibility and tools to secure. CrowdStrike has great visibility and tools to secure. But if you don't have this type of in-context visibility, it actually makes it real. And you may have a great team, but it really makes it difficult for them to adopt cloud services because now everything is sort of collapsing and converging, right? So I feel CrowdStrike has helped us adopt cloud, feeling more secure about what we're doing, or more confident rather. And I think that's very valuable.
So was it the case prior, Saj, that with your infrastructure team and your security team, that they were probably looking at two different consoles in terms of trying to, solve the same problem in terms of visibility? And is it the case now that at least both teams are looking at the same data set and making the same decisions on that one data set?
Right. So we were not on AWS prior to CrowdStrike, right? So we've been using CrowdStrike for close to 3 years at this point. So today, in both infrastructure team and security teams are looking at CrowdStrike. Obviously, infrastructure team spends more time in their AWS consoles, and the security team spends more time in CrowdStrike console. But to respond to some issue, both teams look at CrowdStrike and move from triage from there essentially.
Cool. And again, I think it's be fair to say in terms of the Falcon Discover for AWS capability we have, to your point, what we're doing there is, again, we're using some of the data that we can gather from our own sensor being down on that endpoint. But as you say, AWS has services, CloudTrail, etc. That again we can pull that information from, pull it into that pane of glass for you, contextualize it as best we can, pulling that data together, just to make it easier for for analysts, be it infrastructure or security folk, just to kind of have that data and insight at their hands. And again, I think certainly we've heard this from customers that we've really appreciated that work that we've done to kind of pull that picture together for them for AWS in terms of visibility and discovery. Actually, Saj, we're kind of talking there about the teams. It's obviously obvious, you have got a team of folk that sit underneath you in that organization. But again, one of the dilemmas and the challenges, I think it's consistent across the whole space, is that it's very hard to find talented security folk who have the requisite skills and experience. And again, there's a massive sort of dearth of those people that are out there. Can you maybe just talk about how that that perspective applies to Oak Hill and how you're basically dealing with that challenge?
Right. So from overall my point of view is that we are a financial services firm, and that's what we really need to focus on, right? So I'm never interested in building, for example, threat hunting teams. So the approach I take is that if we find a vendor that's doing something really good, CrowdStrike, for example, that knows how to hunt for threats or block the threats, or AWS that really knows how to run the infrastructure, right? Let them do that. We focus on unique issues that you guys may not be focused on because they may be either unique to us or are too, I guess, new issues, and you guys haven't, how should I put it, haven't commoditized it to sell it as a service. That's what our internal team focuses on, right? So for example, serverless alert threats and these type of things, that's what we're focused on in our environment right now. So that's why what we have decided, I guess about a year and a half, 2 years ago, to use CrowdStrike, the Endpoint Protection Complete, which is CrowdStrike's incident response team to manage our environment. So for the first year and a half or so, we managed it ourselves, and everything worked fine. However, we felt that CrowdStrike would do a better job at identifying issues within our environment and respond to them. Obviously, we're involved as well, and we can talk to what that means, but we feel that CrowdStrike would be better at managing their own platform than our internal team would be.
Sure. So as you say, we've got the complete team who are really delivering endpoint protection as a service to Oak Hill. Can you maybe just talk about what's kind of been the interaction or what kind of area between the complete team and your own teams? Can you maybe just give a little more flavor to that?
So the way this works is that we have a very well-defined playbook, which has workflows on teams that are involved from the CrowdStrike perspective and Oak Hill Advisors perspective. And when the engagement began, we worked with CrowdStrike to figure out what type of posture we would be in. And I think there are 3 different types of postures. But the point there is that we select how to respond to incidents and what type of interaction would be. For example, are you guys allowed to take a system offline or not? Or you need to call someone. So the playbook essentially defines which systems you guys can take offline versus not, how to respond to certain issues, whom to escalate to, if there's a user involved where, someone from CrowdStrike needs to get in touch with the user. For some users, I would say most users, there is one escalation flow, and you guys can call directly. For other users who may be VIPs, you guys have to go through someone at Oak Hill support or infrastructure or security team, depending on the issue. So we have these very well-defined incident response playbooks, and that's how the engagement typically works. It's still not, fully hands-off type of environment, and I don't think it ever should be. And the reason for that is a lot of the issues, especially that are not obvious, malware type of issues, security experts need to understand the context of them. And for that reason, and we also would like to validate what the vendor is doing. So that's why we're always involved in those type of issues.
So in terms of your decision to kind of, use the complete team for your own resources, then, Saj, was the benefit really there for you about cost reduction, or was it simply you could take those assets and kind of redeploy them into maybe higher value add areas that you thought were more important for you?
Right. So I think the benefit is threefold. One is that it's we always know that we have the right configuration, right? Security is a very complex business, and there are quite a lot of things that CrowdStrike does, and we are not expert at every single one of them. We don't know, changing one toggle here or there, or every single one of them, what it will do, right? So you guys make it really easy for us to figure those things out. And so in terms of adding new functionality, which is happening all the time, right? So it makes it easier from that perspective. So operational overhead, I think, is reduced. The other thing is that the other benefit is that we have a very well-defined incident response plan, which our compliance loves, and if anyone, if we ever had an issue and some auditor came, we are able to share that with them. And I think that could be important to a lot of companies. And the third one is the value add that you talked about. It allows us to focus on the other problems that we have that either CrowdStrike doesn't play in or other vendors don't play in. Help us focus on meeting our business requirements from that perspective.
Perfect. Okay. So Saj, as you say, you're kind of 5 years into this experience in terms of moving to the cloud and using the shared responsibility model to secure your applications in the cloud and your data in the cloud. So maybe you can sum up for folk, what is it you've learned, or maybe other ways this, what have you proven to yourself in terms of this journey that you're on?
Right. So, what I would say to that is that, we selected CrowdStrike not because we felt at the time you guys had the most sophisticated antivirus engine. I'm confident that's true, right? Because you guys catch a lot of things for me, but it was more about having various functionality in one platform, and basically a platform that is extensible, meaning that we're always looking for something, because we're changing fast. The technology we're adopting we're adopting new functionality rapidly, and so we'd like a vendor that actually goes along with us. So we made a call on CrowdStrike about 3 years ago that you guys would adapt to the changing nature of threats and the security industry in general. And I think 3 years later, I feel we were right about that. And actually, you guys went beyond my expectations, quite frankly. I don't know about your own expectations, but definitely my expectations. But, and the reason I say that is we're using other security providers as well, CASBs, for example. We integrate you guys into our CASB. So if something happened on cloud storage, for example, there's a malicious file that's about to get copied over to the endpoint. CrowdStrike is able to block that for us. So we have integrated CrowdStrike with those type of vendors. We also integrate you guys for further data analytics with our SIM provider. So the point is that the integrations have been added as we were hoping in a timely manner for us. AWS is a perfect example. We really would not have gone to AWS if we didn't feel that the endpoints were going to be protected, right? So we would have changed our vendor from an endpoint protection because AWS was an extremely important decision for us. So just around the time we were planning on moving to AWS, CrowdStrike came with this AWS visibility module, right, and the integration there. So basically, 3 years later, technology works. The team that manages our environment delivered. They go by the playbook for the most part. All the incidents that we haven't had any security incident, but anything that was identified in the system got dealt with, meaning someone addressed it, there were notes written about it, and we were informed based on the playbook on what happened, how it got addressed. And quite frankly, the technology works. So we're quite happy 3 years later.
I'm glad to hear it. So, Saj, maybe just to kind of finish things off, I think you said it very well at the beginning, is that the cloud is not a destination, it's a journey. You're constantly having to kind of think about what's next and evolving things. So can you maybe just outline for folk, just to kind of wrap up here, what's your thinking in terms of next steps? So
the next steps really are the replatforming of the applications on AWS. I would also highlight integration of multiple cloud services, and the security around them is quite important for us. And then the third piece I would mention here is that we have started the evaluation around CrowdStrike's mobile protection. So it's one platform for whether it's desktop endpoint, server endpoint, or our mobile endpoints, which is something new for CrowdStrike, and we really haven't tried that out yet.
Great, okay. And certainly, just from our point of view, again, where our focus is in terms of futures, is obviously, cloud workloads are not going away. Many more customers are on that journey along with you, Saj. So obviously, from our point of view, we're continuing to refine and extend our capabilities in terms of protecting, those infrastructure is moving into the cloud. I made that reference to that one of the things the cloud has helped us with is that the very definition of the endpoint is continually morphing and changing. And there are new forms of endpoint and compute that are coming along. We've talked about containers, serverless, etc. So again, within the Falcon platform, what we're doing is making sure again that we can protect those kind of new definitions that come along. Visibility will never be done with visibility, just simply again because of the very nature and the volume of things that are happening in the cloud is that we have to have the ability to help our customers understand what is happening in the cloud and bring that back to them so that again they can make the smart security decisions based on that context. So again, that is an ongoing focus for us. And then again, that you referenced that again, CrowdStrike, we did the integrations with AWS. We've been at pace in terms of what Samir has been talking about. They take security very seriously in terms of security of the cloud, and again that we're trying to make sure that we participate in that and help them out where we can. And obviously, again, is to make sure that we are kind of making that we can stand up to that security in the cloud capability. So we're going to be focused in there. And I kind of referenced it that we have the platform we've opened it up to third parties because there are use cases and capabilities again for that we address for AWS, but we're also aware we don't cover everything, and that there are particular things and use cases that might be aligned with AWS and that security in the cloud that again maybe a partner can address for yourself without you having to install another agent or start up another login in terms of a cloud infrastructure. You should be able to get that all from, as you say, that one CrowdStrike pane of glass that you get. So again, that is really where our focus is in terms of futures and where our thinking is. So hopefully that is useful to folk on the call here. So we've covered a lot of ground here. There's a lot of assets that give a lot more detail, probably contextually and also technically about, what is the level of integration that CrowdStrike has for AWS and our capabilities there. And I've kind of just noted them up here in the slide, and they'll be available after the webinar for folk to go and look at and download and use and hopefully get value from. And with that, I think we've come to the end of these kind of prepared kind of remarks. And it's really now hand it back to Samir just to see if there's any questions that Saj and I can handle for folk. So Samir, back to you.
Thanks, Con and Saj. I think that was a very engaging discussion. So we do have a couple of questions here, and let me get to the first one. I guess this is a question for you, Con. Is there any metadata that can be fed into a SIEM from CrowdStrike?
Yeah, I mean, we're gathering metadata all the time from that agent. So again, when we have those events gathered, and there's probably in excess of like 500 of them currently, I think, for the Windows platform, and again we're collecting for Mac OS and also for Linux. All of that can be fed into a SIEM. We have an API capability where you can, in effect, export that data out into that SIEM, and it then becomes available to you. And again, Saj, I think you referenced that you have your own SIEM. And again, I would believe that you're obviously making use of what we have, and we can pass that off from Falcon into your SIEM. Right.
We've integrated CrowdStrike into our SIEM for about 2 years, where we take all the metadata and correlate that with various other systems that we are using. We have also started looking at some of the partners, their platform partners, just mentioned from a user behavioral analytics perspective, to be more specific, to see if CrowdStrike data can be used from that perspective as well. And that's the point I was making earlier as well about the platform. It's not just about next-gen AV or something like that. It's more about how can we use one platform and integrate with various other services that we need when we need it.
Cool. So I guess next question, back to you, Con. Does Falcon platform have support on GovCloud in addition to the general regions that we have access to?
Yes, it does. I think I referenced it in the actually the shared responsibility module there, Samir, is that we're obviously providing the platform to commercial customers, and we have a GovCloud version of our platform as well. It's available there for customers who want to use it there. And again, we're using obviously AWS infrastructure to help us with our GovCloud presence there. So we've got the platform available on GovCloud as well.
And then going back to you, Saj, so the question was for Oak Hill, how was the deployment experience with CrowdStrike, and how quickly were you able to see the value of the CrowdStrike solution?
So I guess two solutions here, right? First one was the actual deployment of the agent and using it, and then year and a half later, it was the actual deployment of or handing over the day-to-day management to the CrowdStrike team. So I think experience in both of them was really, really good, and the value we were able to realize it quite quickly. I don't know how to put metrics around that, but we were, without going into number of endpoints we were able to do both within. So the onboarding took about a week for the endpoint deployment and configurations and then learning and all that, which I feel is very quick. This is all sites and within a week. And then the onboarding of the managed team, going through the playbooks, those type of things, that took about 2 weeks or so.
Awesome. And then, Con, for you, what are the products and services that you get with Falcon Complete? You touched a little bit upon this, but if you can kind of expand on some of those things.
Yeah, so I said Complete is really delivering endpoint protection as a service, and we bundle up some of the core capabilities you'd expect to have. So you want to have prevention capabilities. So we have our Falcon Prevent service in there. The next thing is then you would want to have detection. So we have it looking at EDR. So you also get Falcon Insight, which is our EDR offering. And then the third element is then looking at hunting. So the ability to do proactive threat hunting. So you then get our Falcon Overwatch service offered in there as well. And then the fourth thing is then coming back to the point about visibility. And then we have Discover offered there really for IT hygiene. So really trying to understand what your environment is and making sure that, again, you've got a good grip on that. So what we do is we bundle those capabilities together into Complete. And then the most important thing is actually, as Saj was referencing there, is then we have a Falcon Complete team who are basically looking at the console. They're managing those detections. They're responding using a playbook that is agreed between CrowdStrike and the customer, in this instance, Oak Hill, about what is the appropriate, a way to remediate these things. And I said the Complete team will actually do remediation. And remediation is not just about if there's something happens to the endpoint that we immediately just re-image it. They will go in and they will forensically examine the system and go into the registry and clean that out and change the settings, etc., and make sure it's got back to a working state without necessarily having to re-image. Sometimes you have to do it, but by and large we try and not do that. So that is all wrapped up and really delivered as a service back to the customer.
Cool. All right. I think we're at the top of the hour. So thank you, Con and Saj, for joining us, and everyone else for taking the time to be on today's webinar. And so thank you.